All right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to BostInno's 2021 Startups to Watch, presented virtually this year. My name is Rowan Walrath, and I am the interim editor at BostInno, as well as the life sciences reporter at our sister publication, the Boston Business Journal. We're thrilled you could join us today for this afternoon filled with learning, getting to hear from some of this year's 2021 Startups to Watch. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with BostInno, we're a news and events platform dedicated to covering startups and innovation in Greater Boston. We're a sister publication of the Boston Business Journal, and we're also part of American Inno, a network of sites in 14 markets and growing, you heard it here first, that catalyzes innovation nationwide. At BostInno, we work to connect innovators in a couple of ways. First and foremost is The Beat, a newsletter that goes out every weekday, and you should consider it your one-stop shop for everything going on in Boston's startup scene. You can sign up for The Beat by going to BostInno.com, where you'll also find original coverage on up-and-coming startups, like our Startups to Watch, fundraising, ecosystem trends, big personnel moves, and more. And of course, we work to connect entrepreneurs through events like this one. Now, before we begin the program, just a couple of housekeeping items. Please remember that all attendees are in listen-only mode with no camera access. If you do have a question, you should see a question box in your GoToWebinar panel. Please feel free to submit your questions and comments in that box throughout the program. We'll do our best to get to each and every one during our Q&A portion. BostInno is holding our Startups to Watch event 2021 annually. We're holding it virtually this year. We hold it annually. And we'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Onshape, for their continued support and helping to make today's program possible. Today's program will feature selected Boston startups from our 2021 Startups to Watch list. These startups are positioned to make big moves in the next year, whether that's raising a sizable funding round, acquiring another company, accomplishing fast growth, or simply continuing to do great work on challenging problems. Before I introduce our panelists for today's program, I'd like to hand it over to Doug Banks, Executive Editor of the Boston Business Journal, and John Hirschtick, co-founder of Onshape, to join me in kicking things off. We're looking forward to hearing success stories, challenges, John's entrepreneurial journeys, and how technology has been used for good and strategies to keep your employees engaged in this virtual world. Welcome, y'all.
Thank you so much, Rowan. I want to welcome all of you here, and I want to thank John for taking some time out of his busy day to join us. We're going to be bringing him on momentarily. There he is. Welcome, John.
Doug, great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So thanks again. I wanted to, I'm looking forward to the next 20 minutes, a half hour, everybody. John and I are gonna chat a little bit, and then we'll have some time for your audience questions at the end. I'll let you know when that is, but feel free as you hear the conversation, as things occur to you, to put your questions right there in the question box. So John, you're the co-founder and the CEO of Onshape, which is now part of PTC. But you founded 3 companies, all of them in computer-aided design. First was Premise in the late 80s, I think early 90s, which was bought by Computer Vision, for those of you who have been around as long as John and I have in the Massachusetts tech community. And then, John, that was followed by SolidWorks, which you founded in 1993, I believe, right. And that was in your home. So we are here today to celebrate startups, and you are someone who knows all about that. That's a business now doing, I think, $1 billion in sales. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It was acquired in '97 by Dassault Systems. And Onshape is it safe to say that that's the SaaS version, the software as a service version of what you were doing there?
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Yeah.
So, but in that one you started with a team of 5 co-founders, including an old friend, Axel Bachara at Atlas Ventures, someone who I've not talked to in a long time, but a longtime staple in the Boston venture capital community.
Yeah, and fantastic board member at Onshape and at SolidWorks, where he was a board member and investor, one of his first investments in his career, I believe.
So we'll be talking about your roots and more in 2019. For those in the audience who don't know, Onshape, you sold Onshape to PTC for $470 million, which again, I think we reported was the biggest acquisition for PTC up to that point. And you've been working now at PTC to help them move to cloud-based software rather than sort of the more traditional on-premise software that the tech community here had been doing for so long. And you have, I think, about 100 Onshape employees, or at least did at the time. Is that about right?
Well, we had about 100 at the time, but now it's a lot closer to 200 because at PTC we've grown the team very rapidly. So we're we're not quite 200, but we're getting close to that. We've had huge growth in team and business and so forth as part of PTC.
Fantastic. Well, one thing that some of our audience members may not know is before all of those accomplishments, you're a professional magician, as well as a member of the renowned MIT Blackjack team that was featured in the movies 21 and Breaking Vegas. So you are a professional card counter. And it is in that vein that I wanted to aim some of my questions. So I recall that you did a panel with MIT's entrepreneurship expert, Bill Owlett, probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I looked up the write-up from that recently. And in it, you discussed several themes that you learned from those Blackjack days that have helped you with your entrepreneurship and that sort of align with entrepreneurship. So for the short time that we have today, that's what I want to focus on.
Okay,
the first one that I want to talk about, because it applies specifically to Onshape, was the idea of working as a team. So in Blackjack and in Onshape, you talk to us about what it means for a startup to work like a team. How did it work in your Blackjack game, and then how does it work in entrepreneurship?
So in Blackjack, I really learned, of course, I worked on teams in school and so forth, but in a business like Blackjack, and it was a business, we made money playing, we trained as a team and we played as a team and we invested as a team. And we worked very, very closely. It's a very intense team activity, kind of like I imagine a serious sport or a military unit. I'm not comparing what we did to the gravity of that, but the intensity of working. You're really working with people, not only preparing, but in the casino itself, you're giving signals to each other. You're having to get comfortable with relying on your teammates' skills, relying on their honesty, because it's a cash business in a sense, and there's you're relying on people to have integrity, training, skills, signaling, discretion, good judgment in tight situations sometimes, and it really taught me quite a bit about working as a team under intense circumstances. And of course, in a startup, it's all built on teamwork. And I've been very, very lucky in my career to have some fantastic co-founders and management team members.
Excellent. And this was big money. I mean, we're not talking, a couple $100 here. I mean, you guys made hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, we made millions of dollars actually over the years I was associated with the team. And you say it's big money. Well, big and small are relative terms, so compared to some of the startups you have here or other businesses, but we made millions of dollars over the years, and we would bet, at time you had a very wide range of betting depending on whether you had an advantage or not. Sometimes you bet $5 or maybe $2 if it were allowed, but $5, $25. And other times you'd bet $5,000 on a hand in each of 4 spots. So you might put $20,000 out on the table at one time in 4 betting circles of 5,000 each. So occasionally we saw $10,000 limits and things. We were usually more concerned with maximums because we want to put, once you have an advantage, you want to put money to work, which is the principle, I think, of the B round in entrepreneurship. Once you have the advantage, get some more money out there to work.
There you go. What's the biggest bet you ever placed in Blackjack?
Well, I've bet 20,000 more times than I could remember. 4 hands at 5,000. I cannot. Did I actually ever bet? Usually 5,000 was the maximum we saw, and 4 hands was about the maximum I'd bet. Maximum per hand 5,000. I've seen 10,000. I can't recall betting more than $20,000 going in the betting circle. But of course, then strategy might dictate doubling down, splitting. So I think I've probably ended up with more like quite likely 30,000 on the table at one time.
And what's the biggest bet you ever made in business?
Well, depends how you measure biggest. If you mean venture capital raised or stage of life, what I put on the line at that stage of life. Certainly with Onshape, we raised the most capital for a variety of reasons. It's the most recent SaaS-based business, the J curve kind of phenomena. You need more capital in subscription business and so forth. But I'd say probably my leap to start SolidWorks was my biggest leap in a sense, because it was a stage in my life where I had to give up a career, maybe like many of the startups to watch, a career that was a pretty good career. And, you kind of leave and say, I remember making lists of pros. The list of whether to do it or not was much longer for SolidWorks than Onshape. Onshape, I felt I had to do. I didn't really have a choice. I didn't find it. It found me. It's an opportunity, so to speak. I mean, not literally, but it was obvious that I had to do it.
And we'll come back, and we'll definitely come back to that. So speaking of risk, another theme that I think applies to both Blackjack and entrepreneurship is risk, and particularly de-risking risk. So a lot of people think entrepreneurs get a thrill from laying it all on the line for risking. But one could argue that entrepreneurs' greatest strength is de-risking risk. So taking a calculated risk. Talk to us about the idea of de-risking risk when you're sitting at a casino with tens of thousands of dollars in front of you, and obviously the high stakes is a gambling term for a reason. So you've played a couple of different high stakes games. Talk about de-risking risk in each case.
So actually, in de-risking risk, you want to the obvious thing is to eliminate as much risk as you can, and say, okay, how can we minimize risk here? This is typically in the early stages of a company. You'd say, well, we have these kinds of risks. I like to write down, top 5 or 10 risks in any venture and sort of think about them. Like it could be, there's a technical risk is the obvious one. Will it work? You de-risk it earlier rather than later. Like you say, what can we do now to prove to ourselves? And this is pretty obvious. You do this. But I also think there's a risk management element where I think people say entrepreneurs are really risky people. I think entrepreneurs are willing to take risks that can be as much as possible calculated and known. Like I say, I don't mind taking risks, but I really mind taking risks that I don't realize I'm taking. That is really aggravating. Like it's okay to say, look, this is a risky tech, or here's a decision to make. But if you don't realize it's a risk, you don't realize you even have a decision, and later on something happens, that's what entrepreneurs don't like to do. So they're risk managers in a sense, and that's what we did certainly with Blackjack.
How do you ensure that that you're not taking a risk that you're unaware of? I would imagine that you have to have a certain number of people around you, certain people who can help you to recognize those blind spots that you may have.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Certainly getting other eyes on it. First having that kind of attitude that says, we spend so much time promoting what we're doing to others, to customers, prospective employees, and investors, of course. But we need to, I like to say a good entrepreneur is like a I used to say a thermos bottle, but today I'll say like a Yeti mug. They're hot as heck on the outside and cold as ice on the inside. You have to be both. You have to be really on the outside, very able to promote and tell your story. And on the inside, you need to constantly be thinking, what am I missing, or what are the risks here? And then surrounding yourself with people. In fact, I was thinking about board composition and advisor composition in my last 2 entrepreneurial meetings. This week, I've advised 2 entrepreneurs. They didn't make the list, but they're both Boston area startups. It didn't make the startups to watch list. But in both cases, after hearing the founder present, I said, I can tell you're missing important nutrients, if you will, in your board member diet. Like your board members are not, there's advice I can give you that you're not getting. So you're absolutely right. You want to think about, do I have the right mix of people in my board or advisory group, and talk to them regularly. I like advisors you can just call up and talk about something like, I might call, but you call different people for different things. I remember talking to someone about a major technology decision we had with Onshape, and I called someone who worked at one of our investors, not the investor on our board, not really their thing. I called someone I'd met who was involved in the venture firm and ran the decision by with them. And that was very, very helpful to me. And so, it's right tool for the job you go to, right person for the job.
And it must be hard, I would imagine, for entrepreneurs, especially first-time CEOs, to go to those board members who've given them a lot of money, because you want to be the person with the answers, right? So I think it's hard to be vulnerable to an investor who's just giving you a lot of money because they're putting their trust in you to then be able to have that sort of, ability to go to them, right?
You're right, but that's a two-way street, Doug. It's not only incumbent on the entrepreneur to be able to go and make themselves essentially vulnerable and say, let me lay it out there. But it's also, on the side of the investor, advisor, board member. You have to make these entrepreneurs comfortable and be a good listener and someone that they get comfortable talking to you about the whole risk. And I think many are, but some aren't. Some make you worry that any flaw revealed or risk or they're too busy telling you what to do all the time to listen to.
Well, that makes me think of the next topic, which is having a long-term vision despite short-term fluctuations. In other words, you might lose a couple of hands, I would imagine, in blackjack. I mean, or maybe you never lost a hand. I don't know. I would lose some hands for sure. But
actually,
talk
Doug,
a little bit about that.
You lose more than you win. You lose. I've definitely lost more hands at blackjack than I won in my career. I just happen to have more money bet on some of the ones that I won.
So talk about that, because it's the same question, right? In blackjack, if you're going to lose more than you win, and in the startup world, you're going to face short-term headwinds that you may not even necessarily have seen coming at the beginning. But so when you're founding a company, when you're starting that up, sort of what's your North Star, if you will, in building that company? How do you maintain that long-term vision? Just like in when you were playing with your blackjack team, how did you guys maintain that goal focus, the longer term focus, even when the house was winning in the short term?
Well, you have confidence in your system, and you also remember not to over rotate on small sample sizes. This is something I learned in blackjack that I see in business all the time, that people see a relatively small sample size of events. It doesn't matter what it is, marketing programs, sales efforts, and they don't realize that how long it takes to really get in the long run with anything. The same with blackjack. We had a good understanding that you could have times where you would lose money over a seemingly extended period of time, but that was normal, and eventually eventually net we're gonna win money over time. And you realize that the long run is longer than people think, and most people overgeneralize short-run results. You see it all the time with people, like some person lucked into some spot in their career and had something good happen. You see, oh, they're amazing, and some great person, executes very well and has a bad result, and they're forever labeled, in a bad way. And in fact, you have to look at it and say, that person did everything right. They happened to lose the hand, but they played it extremely well. And those are people that that you want to make sure you see for all their worth and all the positives they offer.
Thanks, John. So talk about one of the challenges, or give us a challenge that you had faced at some point in one of your startups, perhaps. Maybe it was some naysayers who just said, this is ridiculous, what are you doing? Or some other challenge that you faced when you first started your companies that you were able to say, well, okay, but I got to get past this.
Well, naysayers, yeah, I've had a lot of naysayers. I mean, it's like actually in each of the last two companies I founded, both with Onshape and with SolidWorks, people told me the same naysayer stories. They're like, well, the product's going to be too hard to build. The market doesn't need another product like this. There are plenty of CAD systems already. You'll never get the platform. With SolidWorks, it was Windows, believe it or not. Windows was a new thing when I started SolidWorks. I don't think anyone today considers Windows a new thing. So when we started Onshape, it was the same old objections. So yeah, all kinds of naysayers. It'll never be fast enough. Engineers won't trust it as a platform. It's not what customers are using. Blah blah blah. This is what they told me. So with SolidWorks, I had all these people tell me it was a bad idea. I remember one venture firm. I remember the firm and the investor, but I'm not going to say it here. I went in for the meeting, and we had like an hour booked, and halfway through he said, we're not interested. It's not multimedia. This is like 1993. And so we got turned down. I could not raise money for SolidWorks. For Onshape, we had objectors, but we quickly raised money because we had such really good returns with SolidWorks. And once you have good returns, it's easier to raise money. With Blackjack, today Blackjack's an interesting story, and people will say, oh, tell us about the team, and that must have been exciting, and you won money. But when I started with Blackjack, a lot of my friends thought it was a terrible idea. Oh,
Really?
you'll never make money, and you'll never, that won't work, or my brother-in-law's auto mechanics dentist goes to Vegas all the time, and they know they're a world expert, and they said it won't work, and I'm like, but I met these people at MIT, and it sounded incredible. And so I really learned with all my ventures, it's not a vote. You want to listen to advice, but even if you talk to 10 friends or business associates, it could be, even if all 10 tell you it's a terrible idea, it doesn't mean it's a terrible idea.
Right.
But you want to listen to them. You want to listen carefully, and then you have to trust it. And that's what I've tried to do. And Blackjack really taught me that, because I forged ahead with that team, and it worked. And now it's an interesting story.
Well, like in entrepreneurship and in cards, I mean, the cards are stacked against you, right? I mean, the house, the phrase "the house always wins" is because the house almost always wins, right?
Yeah, actually, Doug, you're right. And the odds are, my guess is, of all the people who have tried to win at gambling, most don't, which is, and most startups and new business ventures don't work out. Let's be honest. We all know that, but many do. And, I know this. I know that 100%, there's 100% failure rate or non-success rate among ideas that aren't tried. There's no,
right.
If you don't try, you're not going to win. If you try, you might win. If you don't try, you're not going to win. That's kind of how I look at it. And all this, the naysayer views out there, I would say every startup I've ever seen that succeeds, every one of them breaks some assumption. Every new company you see that, they break some rule that people have thought, like, people will never, whatever it is, they'll never go for rides in someone's personally owned car. Well, turns out they do, or they'll never order grocery delivery was kind of laughed at. Well, no one's laughing now. So anyway,
okay, well, last one,
yeah,
and
sure.
then we'll see if we can have some audience questions. But there's there in Blackjack, there was, I've heard you talk about the thrill of bringing down the house, that sort of idea of your David team beating the Goliath that is a Vegas casino. And I mean, I can understand how that would work in Vegas, but how does that work in business? And now you're actually at one of the big companies. You're one of the big guys. So I'd love for you to answer the question in two ways. One, talk about the thrill of being the David, and then now talk about what it must be like if do you consider yourself the Goliath, and how do you avoid the next David?
I think that being the David is not the goal. It's a byproduct. It's circumstantial and it's interesting, but that's not the goal. That's not our North Star. Like we're not trying to prove that small companies beat big ones or new products beat old ones, or I'm not on a, people often think I'm on some grudge match against my old company. They're like, oh, you're just trying to, beat SolidWorks because you don't like them or something. Well, I like the people there, or they'll say, I can't believe you started a company to compete. And those aren't really where I'm focused. I'm focused on the customer. My victory is to have companies, use our products and use them to do something good in the world, building new products. I'm not even in the business. My business isn't really selling software. My business is our customers building great products. And so if you set your compass there, like, that's why people are like, well, do you like working at a big company better or a small company better? I like working in a place that lets me pursue that mission to serve our customers, to improve the world. I really mean that. That's why, like, I was delighted to find out that one of these startups to watch in we had a little chat before this webinar started with the panelists you're going to meet, and they said SomEV, Somerville EV. They use our product, and that's like the biggest thrill to me. So yeah, the David Goliath thing, it's interesting. Just like the excitement of the casino was an interesting byproduct of what we did. Yeah, it was exciting going in that environment and some of the glitz and things, but that wasn't the goal. So yeah, these big versus small entities. The other thing is, I think what's really important is who's more agile is more important than ever. So I want to be the most agile entity. And PTC is showing that it can be quite agile, which is really cool. We're doing all kinds of cool things, and we're moving quickly. And I think agility is the asset. So typically smaller orgs are more agile, but a larger org can be agile too, or a unit of a larger org. So think agile and move quickly and set your eye on the real goal, not the grudge matches.
We hear a lot about companies that are focused on ESG, sort of working for the social good. One of the questions from the audience is aimed at founders who build products, so maybe even those who are using Onshape, but how should they think about building products that will impact humanity in a positive way? So talk a little bit about how innovation is good for society at large and for humanity here.
Well, first, can I start with an observation, not just an answer? Sure. Is I was really struck reading the startups to watch list. By the way, it's 21 this year, which is kind of cool. So we're thematically on point here.
We'll have to talk to Rowan about that, because I didn't even make the connection. But that's because you're a better counter than me, John.
Well, I have a feel. I just noticed that earlier today, but I thought, I have a feeling it has to do with the year 2000, obviously, but 21
exactly
startups.
Right.
So what I was struck by is how many of the companies have such prominent social agendas, like all of them. All of them. There's no. I think it used to be the culture of entrepreneurship used to be so much more oriented toward just making money or something that I never really liked that. I like mission-driven things, but these are very socially conscious mission-driven. So I think that's wonderful, and that's a cultural, that's a cultural thing in where the world's going. I think a lot of investors are more drawn to invest in that way. I think a lot of people are more drawn. I think what we're seeing is people are more drawn to invest themselves in an agenda that includes social good more than ever today. And so that's what you're seeing. But innovation isn't always for the social good. Entrepreneurship isn't always. I can't think of any aspect of playing blackjack that was for the social good. I'm trying now. I'm trying to think, is there one? No, not directly. I mean, indirectly, perhaps, the winnings ended up in the hands of people who do good things or something like that. But like with Onshape, I think part of what drives me really is that excitement of my co-founder, John McElhenney, calls it the emotional paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not when we sell a unit Onshape, or even when we see someone talk about how great the software is. It's when we see the products being made. We're in the business of making products that other people use to make products, and it's their products that really, and and there's so many great ones out there. But yeah, I think that it's a culture and personal agenda that says a lot of these founders are drawn like, magnetically, just like they're drawn to entrepreneurship in some way, to doing something new and creative. They're drawn to that social good venture as opposed to another venture they might have thought of that just doesn't have a social good aspect.
Got another audience question here for you. What advice would you give to those who are currently unemployed and looking to break into a startup? They're reading all the time that startups are hiring, and but it's a different culture. Certainly the HR function of a small startup is going to be very different from publicly traded companies
Yes.
like PTC. So do you have any sort of advice pretty quickly, because we're gonna transition back to the panel.
I think the headline advice I do is, if you've never been in a startup, go visit one. It doesn't have to be one that you're applying to, because when you apply, you're right, Doug, they don't understand that there isn't an HR department. So when you say you're looking for HR or something, startup life is a different world. And so I think one thing you could do is do a little research, which would be get yourself over to one or two somehow, call up someone, maybe even someone, that you're going to hear about today or on the panel, and just say, look, I know you don't have jobs, but can I come over and look around and get a feel for what life is like there? And you'll go, oh, I get it now, and it will help you. If you've only been in a big company, you get a feel of the lay of the land, do a little entrepreneurship tourism, and you have to do it virtually today, but you could do it virtually. Meet people, not just because you're applying for jobs. Meet people to learn what their life is like.
And last question, I was speaking with a mutual friend of ours who shared with me a story about back when you were at SolidWorks, you had a trade show or a trade show product demo show called SolidWorks World, which was supposed to be held at Caesars. My understanding was that you were supposed to be the keynote. There were 5,000 people that were going to be there. What happened tell that story, and then we'll that'll be our ending story.
So we had 5,000 people coming to the SolidWorks convention. I had been barred there many years before. Being barred means they say, if you come back, we'll have you arrested for trespassing. And they can do it to anyone. They could do that to you, Doug. They may, because we had this call, they may put you on the list. They don't have to tell you why. It's just arbitrary, and they do it to different people. So technically I couldn't go on the premises, and my co-founder was very concerned. So the woman who ran the event for us, wonderful manager, she got in touch with Caesars and got me this letter that said, it's okay for John to be here, and signed, the VP of Caesars. And she wrote me a little post-it. She put it on my desk, and she said, here's your get out of jail free card. Carry it with you at all times when you're at Caesars on person. And she said, P.S. it wasn't easy. And so I got a special letter so I could go to my own user conference, but that, it's just fun. That was a long time ago. But
how many casinos are you still barred from, John?
I don't really know, because what happens is I got barred only I really got that kind of barred only in a few places. I got what we call soft barred, in more places. But what happened is they all acquired each other. So there's like whole networks of casinos that I guess I technically, but no one really cares. No one's gonna be watching the door for this old guy who counted cards in the 80s. That's not their top priority these days. So.
And how about the Encore Boston? Have you played the Encore Boston yet?
I have not played there. I dropped off one of my young adult children there for a concert, and while I was there, I felt it would be unsociable of me not to at least walk the floor. So I quickly scanned the games. This was when it first opened. All I can say is that the games the blackjack they were dealing on the main casino area, bad odds. There was subsequently Globe article, 6-5 blackjack. Stay away from that. In the high stakes area, they were dealing a more attractive game, and I thought, okay, I'd check that game out. Now, conditions probably have changed for a lot of reasons since then, but it looked like a nice place. But you got to be careful where you play.
Well, we have very quickly moved into an area of conversation that I'm way over my head, and I have no idea what makes a good and a bad table, but we will have to table that for now.
Right.
And John, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, for spending this with us, and for sharing some of these insights with our audience.
Doug, thank you for having me, and also thank you for all you're doing for the community. We need it more than ever, whether you're a startup or a more established company. You know, you're really putting out a lot of great great insights and information that I know all of us are finding more important than ever. So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, John. Thanks so much. And so thanks again for being here. Now we're going to turn it back to Rowan, who will get us started with the rest of the program. Rowan, it's back to you.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for that great opening. I feel like I learned a little bit about entrepreneurship, a little bit about Blackjack, a little bit about trespassing law. So we've really covered a gamut here. So thank you again so much. And thank you to Onshape for making today's program possible. We so appreciate it. Great. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists who will be joining me on screen in just a moment. First, we have Bill Gianokous, who is the CEO and co-founder of Goodpath. Goodpath is a digital health startup that takes an integrative medicine approach to telehealth, enabling providers to support the chronic care needs of their patients. Goodpath launched just last year. We will also have Natasha George, the co-founder of SomEV. SomEV also launched last year. It is a micromobility startup that has created electric scooters and mopeds with swappable batteries. SomEV does direct-to-consumer sales, but also recently began its first B2B partnership. We'll get into all that in a moment. And last but not least, we have Shironda White, founder and CEO of CauseEDU. CauseEDU is a financial planning startup whose platform is designed to help students and their families understand college before they enter and ultimately prevent dropout. Welcome, y'all.
Hey, Rowan, nice to be here.
Hey there.
Yep, nice to have all of you. So let's go ahead and dive right in. When we were looking at what startups to include on this year's list of startups to watch, as John pointed out, it was 21 startups to watch in 2021. It seemed kind of strange to be making predictions about how things were going to go for any individual, let alone any company, given that 2020 was not exactly what anyone thought it was going to be. Bill, I know that you sped up the launch of your startup, and Natasha, you found an opening for a B2B partnership. I'd like to just kind of go around the horn and to hear from each of you about one business decision that marked 2020 as a milestone for you.
Sure, I can go first. So March 2020 for us was pivotal when it came to, we were originally planning on launching as a direct-to-consumer company, and due to the change in perceived economics for the US population, we made a strategic decision to go more of a traditional B2B2C route, and we launched Goodpath to provide healthcare for large employers and their employee base today. So we changed our C to be employees of large employers.
And you sped up your launch as well, isn't that right?
We did. We saw a huge opportunity to launch quicker. We were able to hit the market sooner. There was a tremendous need for employers to start offering virtual healthcare, and by doing that, we were able to get to a larger market share sooner due to COVID. Cool.
Great. Natasha, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So we were also focused on the B2C market, and we were really planning on launching and doing pop-ups all around the city and really promoting our product to the direct-to-consumer market. And when the pandemic hit, I think the biggest defining sort of decision for us in 2020 was, like you mentioned, we had this opening for a B2B opportunity. And what we realized was there are opportunities that sometimes can present themselves when you least expect them. And I think the B2B partnership with the restaurant has really opened up an avenue for us that we hadn't previously considered. Our slogan has always been electric mobility for the people. And we were really focused on the people, but we didn't actually realize that part of our goal is just getting electric mopeds out on the street and lowering carbon emissions that way. And it's still for the people. It's just them getting their food differently or them getting their groceries differently. So I think that was a really big decision for us in 2020.
Yeah, Natasha, can you tell me how that partnership, the restaurant that you partnered with is Spice, the robotic kitchen that actually just opened a second location. Tell me how that partnership came about.
Yeah, so we were looking for test participants for our product, our electric moped, and we sent out a Slack message to the Greentown Labs community. So we're a member company there, and we figured it's a safe space to try out this new product. And someone from Spice just messaged us and said, hey, I would love to try your product, and we're actually looking for electric mopeds. And so this might be the perfect opportunity, and it sort of just went from there. It was really nice to have someone in the Greentown community work with us as our first B2B partnership.
Awesome. And Shironda, I know you're no stranger to pivots, but talk to me about how 2020 was for CauseEDU.
Yeah, so we actually had a very interesting timeline, and I guess it was kind of ironic how we pivoted, but we launched CauseEDU in 2017 as a crowdfunding platform that helps students raise money for college. And so many prospective donors and current donors were asking, well, why do students need this much money? How do they not know before they get to college how much they need? And so we started doing research in 2019 and launched our financial education platform in March of 2020. And it was literally 1 hour before Harvard announced they were shutting down and sending their students home, and then a few hours later MIT, and then eventually the other schools. And so our timing was ironic in the sense that we had this online platform ready to go as soon as the pandemic really took off, and it worked for us.
Great. Would you say that that was your biggest pivot, was just deciding to launch at that time?
Oh, absolutely. And it's good that we'd already planned to, so it wasn't like, you know, it's March, everything is falling apart, everyone's home, now we have to figure out how to move all of our, you know, in-person courses online. It was literally, we already had them. And so there was no significant amount of time that was needed to transition, which was great. We were able to go to schools and education organizations and say, we have this platform, we're ready to go.
Awesome. Bill, what do you think was the most significant pivot for Goodpath?
As I mentioned earlier, it's for sure targeting those large employers. For us, you know, as people started working from home, there was an increase in musculoskeletal issues, which is typically back pain, neck pain, hip pain, increase in behavioral issues that typically manifest themselves in sleep and insomnia, in IBS and digestive issues. And it was a huge opportunity for us to go and provide a service that probably wasn't as needed before March. You know, you can go get some care, you can go to a brick and mortar location, but you really were left to your own ability to manage your healthcare. And this was a great opportunity for us to put together a solution that really allowed employees that were seeing this increase in issues get the care they needed. And for us, you know, COVID helped accelerate our adoption rate through the employers tremendously.
I'm curious, Bill, as you're seeing some of these new issues for patients pop up, are there any that you think are going to be sticking with us for the long term?
Yeah, we're about to publish a study that shows a dramatic increase in cost for the conditions we're dealing with. For MSK, we envision it going up by 38% this year because of a lot of deferred care. People didn't get the care they needed in 2020. People are now going to see exacerbated conditions, and ultimately, with just a natural inclination of cost of healthcare increasing, plus the deferred care, we're seeing a big increase in what looks like for 2021 spend. So ultimately, I think it'll take a couple of years for us to get back to more norm. I think working from home and how much that adoption maintains also has a tendency to increase certain conditions. So ergonomically, are we all situated correctly? Are we all sitting in the correct chair today? Are we far enough from our keyboard? You know, that alone could exacerbate conditions. So I think conditions will ultimately get back into an even keel. We don't know what that is. We don't know how many people are going back to the office, how many people are going to work from home, how behavioral stress will be perceived in the marketplace. But I do think there will be an equilibrium point as we start living a closer to normal existence. The new normal is not defined, or we'll see what it looks like. I'm hoping it's close to what it used to be, but to be determined.
Yep, I feel like the new normal is one of those phrases that I hear a lot lately, along with unprecedented and now more than ever.
Good point.
Natasha, what would you say was the biggest pivot in 2020 for SomEV?
So I would say that this happened closer towards the end of 2019, early 2020, when we made this pivot to really focus on the direct-to-consumer market, and we had to kind of pivot again for the B2B market. But we initially, in early 2019 and late 2019, when we had come up with this idea of swappable batteries for electric micromobility, Lime and Bird had sort of become household names at the time. There were all of these scooter operators that were flooding the market, and we were getting a lot of advice and sort of a general push in this direction of maybe partnering with companies in that space. And we were like, okay, let's pivot to that. Maybe let's not even think about the B2C market. It might be really difficult. Investors generally get a little bit afraid when they hear the direct-to-consumer market. B2B, I feel like, seems a little bit easier, and it's, I mean, it's still hard, but it seems like the preferred route. So as early entrepreneurs, we were taking in all this advice, and I think we realized pretty quickly that that might not be the best option for us. One, because it really steered from our goal of focusing on true sustainability and making sure every part of our product is used to the best, most efficient way. And also, I think that it's really hard to work with larger companies if you're kind of haven't established yourself at all. So we pivoted to really focus on a direct-to-consumer market, really build our brand, build confidence around our product and who we are as people and what we have to offer. And I'm really happy we did that. I think that's definitely the path we're going to continue going down.
Awesome. Great. And before we move on to the next question, just a reminder for our audience, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of this discussion, and you're welcome to send out questions to us at any point, and we'll get to them at the end of the program. Just use the little control panel and go to webinar and send us those, and we will do our best to answer them. All right, so again, I want to hear from each of you how the uncertainty of 2020 has influenced the way that you're planning for 2021. I mean, how do you even make business decisions in an environment like this?
That's a great question. So for us, what we've really focused on with CauseEDU is trying to build partnerships. We initially started out focusing on the B2C model, which when you're in the middle of a pandemic and parents are homeschooling as well as working from home and doing everything else, they're not concerned about paying for college necessarily. And so we focused on the schools because of the reality is when you're looking at guidance counselors and others, they're focused on so many things right now in terms of making sure their students have what they need. And so our plan or our way of really focusing on 2021 has really centered around what are we doing for B2B? What are we doing to help schools, to help education organizations, to really help their students? Since they have so many other things to work on, what can we take off of their plate? How can they outsource the financial education piece to us so that they can focus on what they need to for their students?
Absolutely. And I remember you telling me when we talked a couple of weeks ago that you were almost surprised to find that there was this sort of B2B opportunity for you. But the reality is loan providers and educational institutions don't want students to drop out, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that we found with student loan providers is that, of course, they want students to graduate. Number one, because students who graduate from college are more likely to pay back their student loans than those who didn't, of course. And then also the longer students in school, the more they're borrowing. And so they're borrowing more and they're more likely to pay it back. So student loan providers, of course, want students to have sound financial advice when it comes to paying for college. And then even high schools, especially college prep high schools, they want their students to go to the best schools possible, and we can help them to make that happen.
Great.
So for us, I think I'm going to reiterate something John said earlier. As an early stage startup, you try to de-risk as much as possible the business. And while 2020 was a year for the ages, it showed us that we all strive to get back to a norm. So while 2020 threw us for the loop, March, April, I think more by the midsummer and through the fall, we got closer to being a normal society, a normal business, a normal stream. So we try to de-risk as much as possible. We take the data that we have today and we make decisions based on the best data that we have. We are not looking for another black swan event. We're not looking for another cataclysmic life-altering, once-in-a-lifetime event. We're planning for today, but as a startup, we're also understand how we need to be flexible and nimble to be able to adapt to those situations. I think if you've gone through 2020 and you've come out of that well, you have the inherent DNA in order to deal with the next event. Now, again, I don't expect another event anytime soon, and I'm hoping we get closer to normal, but you try to do as best as possible, de-risking anything that you have based on the data that you have in front of you today.
Yeah, 100%. Natasha, what about yourself?
Yeah, I would say to echo Bill's sentiments as well, it's just planning, more short-term goals for us. So initially, in 2019 or generally pre-pandemic, we would plan quarterly goals and really focus on like 3 to 6 month goals. But now we're sort of operating on a month-to-month basis, depending on what the world is looking like at the moment, and how the vaccine is changing things. Does that mean we're going to, start having in-person events anytime soon? So we're kind of like moving on a month-to-month basis. But I will say, something that John mentioned as well, is that the sample set, sometimes you can't really rely on a small sample set. I think 2020 is an anomaly of events, and I think really, hopefully we won't be seeing another pandemic for a while. But I really think that I'm hopeful about just as a species that we will come out of this and things will get back to normal and we can operate at a pre-pandemic level. So I'm hopeful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't know, people really want to get back to what pre-pandemic looked like and sort of, there's this idea of back to normal. What is that going to be? But it's not going to be how 2019 was or anything before that. It's going to be, we're all having lived this reality of working virtually and pivoting from month to month and doing our best. And I think that everybody is going to operate a little bit differently, is my take.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll have a general sense of appreciation for the events that we do have in person, for the normalcy we do have, but I think we'll all come out of this having learned something. And I think will hopefully be a better society for it.
Yeah, that is definitely all we can hope for here. So speaking of short-term goals, I want to talk about your goals for the next 12 months, which is, maybe longer term than the month-to-month pivot we were just talking about. But what would each of you say is the most major thing you're prioritizing for your startup in the next year?
I guess I'll go first. So for us, it's building partnerships with high schools and education organizations. That is the one thing that we're definitely most focused on.
Mm-hmm. Great. Bill, how about you?
So for us, it's really to expand our offering and reach more lives. It's really interesting. One of the things I learned at one of my early startups, I got advice, have a 10 to 20 year vision and a 90-day action plan. And our 10 to 20 year vision is to improve the quality of care for people suffering from chronic conditions in the US. And our goal is to get to as many people as possible now. And it's really around sales and marketing for us. 2021 is a year. We have a very solid baseline in technology and medicine, and now we want to reach as many people as possible and start scaling as quickly as we possibly can. So I'd say our 2021 goal is focused around our B2B initiatives and then marketing for them.
And when you say reaching more people, Bill, are you still focusing mainly in the US or are you planning to expand beyond that?
Yeah, the US is our market right now. Part of our solution is digital, but part of it's physical. We actually, as part of enrolling into our program, we'll ship you everything you need to your house to take care of yourself. The logistics around opening it up outside the United States are tremendous. So we're focusing on the US right now and Canada. And truthfully, the US has the biggest need for this type of care. This really personal, integrative approach is more prevalent in the rest of the world. And the biggest market, the gap that we see the largest is in the US market. So 2021 for sure will be US only.
That's interesting. Thank you. Natasha, what about you?
Yeah, for us, it's really focusing on our electric moped sales. So we have 2 new models that we're offering that go slightly faster than the current model. And we're really excited about moped advocacy and electric advocacy for the community. I think I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of infrastructure, the rules and regulations around moped safety and whether or not you can operate. I think people are still learning about it. So our goal is to really try to host more community events, encourage people to try this new mode of transport. One of my most favorite things about working at SomEV is when people first try a moped, just the pure joy on their face of like, oh my gosh, this is actually a way I can get around town. This is so much fun. It's quiet. It's amazing. So for us, I think that's a thrill for me to really offer this to people. And so our focus is solely going to be electric mopeds.
Mm-hmm. When you say moped advocacy, what kinds of things do you have in mind? I mean, are you doing any sort of like political policy infrastructure conversations right now?
Yeah, we do have a consultant that works with us. He's been with us from day one. He really helps sort of frame things that are happening in terms of legislation that's being passed around electric micromobility. I know that there was a bill that was just passed that defines electric bikes in the state of Massachusetts. So there's now level 1, level 2, and level 3. And our hope is to introduce a bill for electric mopeds as well, because right now they don't need to be registered in the state of Massachusetts, but we think that they should be some of them should be registered, and so we're going to try to see how we can work on that. It's still a work in progress, but hopefully we can really educate people on how to use electric mopeds as an actual way to commute around town 95% of the year, maybe not when it's snowing.
Maybe not in the single degree weather that we're having this weekend.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. Now I want to talk a little bit about Boston's startup scene. So it's constantly changing, as we know. We're all sort of pivoting all the time, and our community is, as a result, pivoting all the time. But it does kind of feel like we're at an inflection point. I want to have each of you think back to when you first decided to found your own startup. Which local startups or startups in your vertical were most inspiring to you? Or in other words, which startups were you watching? Bill, I know that you had some thoughts about this when we talked earlier.
Sorry. Yes. So I've been since I graduated college, I've been in startups pretty much my entire career. I really find that space to be very exciting. I love being able to find initial product to market fit and then scaling the company. So for me, what's been inspiring when I decided to do my first startup, it was more around the 3 startups that I'd been before. The leaders that had started that company, they were inspirational to me. I've had different paths. I've seen successes, I've seen failures, but ultimately, the fact that these people took the risk to create better products, better services, better companies was really exciting to me. And I remember I was working, we had a startup, did very well. It was bootstrapped, never took any VC money, and we sold to a multinational company. And I just had a newborn son. I was traveling back and forth to Paris, and I said, my impact is no longer as great as it was when I was at a startup. And I really wanted to do something that had more impact and could affect society more. And that's really the genesis for me, was taking the inspiration from my previous CEOs, previous co-founders of the companies that I'd worked for, and really trying to harness my own abilities to do the same for the industries that I was tackling.
Fascinating. And Shironda, what about you?
So the startup that I watched the most, I would say, would be Unshrink-It, which was founded out of Harvard Business School, actually. And when we launched CauseEDU, it was when I was at BU and business school. And so we learned all the technical aspects of starting a company. But what I thought was really interesting that we weren't learning was the more, I would say, personal aspects of it. And so my friend Desiree Stoller, who was co-founder and CEO of Unshrink-It, she was able to talk me through how you go from being classmates to co-founders and some of the challenges they faced. And so seeing them on Shark Tank and seeing their successes and how they're able to raise money and all of that was great, but it was more so, how do you deal with the people aspect? How do you manage that? And so I just thought that that just watching their success and also being able to ask so many questions was really helpful for me.
What did you learn about the people aspects in those early conversations?
Yeah, so one thing, of course, is that who you start with is not necessarily who you end up with. They started out as a class project that turned into this big thing, and they were making money before they even knew they had a business. And so, there were classmates who said, okay, let's start a business. And then life got in the way. And then it was, my wife is saying that, we need to get a job. And so then it became, I can't run this company with you anymore. And so that's life, that happens, right? And so just seeing that, co-founders have ideas, they have dreams, and some continue and some don't, and companies still live and thrive, even through the transitions. And that was something that I really took from that, and just seeing the sacrifices they had to make, a lot of sacrifices, personal sacrifices that they had to make to start the company, was really inspiring.
Wonderful.
Yeah, for us, it was, so I always sort of paid attention to a lot of the battery startups in the Boston area. Just being from the battery space, I'm constantly amazed by the talent of like battery professionals in the area. We're actually kind of the Silicon Valley of batteries, in my opinion. The Boston area is. It's pretty incredible. But some other companies, when I started SomEV, that I was paying attention to were Zagster and Super Pedestrian. I was really impressed with Zagster's story. I got to meet with the CEO just over coffee one day, and he told me about how he started Zagster and the story behind it. I was really impressed with, they've been around for 10 plus years, and I think he really cared about growing the company organically, and it showed in their operations. And so yeah, I was really impressed by that. And another one was Zipcar, because of the sharing model. So I was really curious about their story as well, and inspired by it.
I love that. Natasha, I'm curious to hear about this battery mecca we have going on. I feel like maybe if you're not in the battery and micromobility space, you might not know about this.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I mean, if you just look at the battery talent and the number of companies here, like Form Energy, Titan, Solid Energy, there's a whole bunch of people working on some really cool chemistries, and I'm excited to sort of brand the Boston area as like Silicon Valley of batteries. That's sort of my personal mission.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to get into audience questions in just a moment. And a reminder, if you have a question, place them in the question box at any time. But before that, I want to again go around the horn and ask one of my favorite questions. What is the best advice you've received on how to make it in the Boston startup world?
So for me, I think the best advice is surround yourself with the best team you can. Surround yourself with the best coworkers, surround yourself with the best advisors, surround yourself with the best investors you can. At an early stage startup, it's really the people that really ultimately define success. And having the right people, the right talent, people that will go to war with you in order to win, in order to pivot, in order to find success is extremely important. And having a culture that's like-minded is also part of that, right? It's the right people with the right culture. So I think it's really been the best success. I've made bad decisions in the past where I hired someone that had a very unique skill set, but there were some red flags around who they were or how we'd work together. And ultimately it came to bite us. And I've learned that it's more important to have the right team, playing the same game at the same time with the same attitude, with previous skills that they bring on board. Yes, it's important, but make sure that you have the right team in place in order to succeed.
Absolutely. I'm not really clear on, here, Shironda's back. It looked like your camera went off for just a moment there. I'm not sure why. Can't hear you either.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. All right. Well, now that everything's on, I'll turn it over to you. What's the best advice you've received?
So the best advice I received actually was from a professor, Greg Solar, who just told me you get what you pay for. And it sounds like simple advice. I know we hear it all the time, but especially when we're looking at whether it's a startup ecosystem, whether it's just in general when it comes to running a business, just making sure that yes, you can, you have a budget that might not be what you want it to be when you're starting out, but just know that going for the lower cost or the free, just because it's within that budget doesn't mean it's going to do the best. Sometimes you need to splurge and pay for what's important to you.
Absolutely. I I have a friend who likes to paraphrase it. She says, "What's cheap becomes expensive," and I always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Cool. Natasha, what's the best advice you've received?
Yeah, for me, I wasn't too involved in the Boston startup scene prior to starting SomEV, and the thing I learned pretty quickly here, and the advice I got was that the startup community here is really close knit, and everyone seems to have an invested interest in each other and making sure we're succeeding. I think that was really heartwarming and just amazing to see how people are willing to go out of their way to help you. So ask for help is when you need it, and see who in your network can help you or connect you with someone else in the Boston startup scene. And so I think that was one piece of advice I really took to heart when we first started. The other one that was interesting is someone said embarrassment is the cost of entry. So if you're not willing to be embarrassed and make a complete idiot of yourself when you're first starting a company, you're probably doing something wrong. You're going to fail. You're going to look like a fool. Just get used to it and get ready to be embarrassed, because if you're not looking back and being embarrassed about what you said at the time, then you're not learning. So I'm just sort of embracing that these days.
I love that. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and dive into audience questions, and audience members, you can keep on sending those in. So this first one is partially targeted toward Natasha, and then I think that the rest of you may be able to chime in on the second part. Are any of the battery startups in this quote unquote mecca tied to A123 and those legacy companies? How important is it to grow large companies as a way of seeding new startups?
Sorry, I think I missed the first part of the question.
Oh, sure. Are any of the battery startups in this quote unquote mecca tied to A123 and those legacy companies?
I think some of them are. There might be a couple of early founders that are now spread across some newer companies. I think that the big thing about battery innovation is that it's really tough. Like what the battery space and people in that space are trying to do is basically solve the next big energy problem. And so I think that generally there will be a lot of failures, there will be a lot of hiccups, but we have to keep trying to innovate. We have to keep trying to solve this problem, and it takes sort of the bravest of souls to actually try to do that. So I don't know if that actually answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I read a piece a couple of years ago that was simply titled "Why We Don't Have Battery Breakthroughs," and it's because people have been plugging away at this problem for literal decades, and the progress is amazing, but extremely incremental, which is perhaps something that entrepreneurs can learn from as well, in addition to some of the academics who've been working on this problem.
Yeah, we've had lithium ion technology for about 30 years now, and it's still the best technology available, but there have been improvements, although, like you said, incremental improvements. So trying to come up with the next big breakthrough in the battery space is a tough problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And now on this idea of corporate innovation, how important is it to grow large companies here in the Boston area as a way of seeding new startups?
So I look at it differently. For my space, for digital therapeutics, Boston is at a unique point where it might not be the mecca of digital therapeutics, but it really should be. We have the medicine and the science that's coming out of our educational institutions, out of our medical systems here. And then we have the web, internet DNA, and we're very uniquely poised to be able to build really cutting edge digital therapeutics. And it probably has something to do with large corporations, but it also has to do with the educational institutions that are powering Boston and the medical systems that are powering Boston. So we look at ourselves as being blessed as we expand our team of medical experts. Boston's the greatest place in the world to get the talent, to bring in thought leaders in this space. So the way that I look at it is slightly different, Rowan. I look at it as the education, the medicine, plus the technology, and the combination of all three uniquely poises Boston as a thought leader and the mecca in digital therapeutics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's this idea of having an ecosystem, right? You've got all these different kinds of collaborators.
Correct.
Awesome. Shironda, I'm wondering about your perspective on this as well, because you are looking to work with higher education institutions and student loan providers, and Boston is sort of another mecca in terms of higher education. We have, what, 60 plus different educational institutions right here in town. So I'd love to hear about the importance of having those schools nearby when it comes to building out CauseEDU.
Yes, absolutely. And so absolutely. So with Harvard and BU and BC and Northeastern, all the schools that are here, Boston is, of course, the education mecca in this country. And number one, it's important in terms of understanding what the school's needs are, because all the different schools here, whether it's a large university, a community college, it doesn't matter. They all have different needs, but they also have some of the same needs, right? And so really being here helps us to understand what the needs of the schools are, and they can collaborate to really kind of share ideas, share success stories and failures, and then help us to better understand the needs so that we can meet them. And so it's kind of a meeting of the minds to a certain extent, just being able to understand all the different demographics and what their needs are.
Awesome, that's fascinating. I do have another question more broadly for each of the panelists. This was from another audience member. What's the take of each of you on the future of working remotely versus working from an office? Natasha, you talked about, collaborating in person and collaborating on events again in the future. And in fact, I think one of the very last events that I attended before, quote unquote lockdown was a Greentown Labs event. So curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that we have now adapted really well to working from home. I think people generally, for the most part, like working from home. It allows a lot more flexibility. I actually think it's going to be a hybrid model. I think people will, some companies might have come to work 2 to 3 times a week and work from home the rest of the time. I think we've gotten really efficient at working from home. So I think that's a good thing. But I think people are going to be looking forward to going back to work. I certainly am. I definitely would love to go back to a fully packed Greentown event and socialize with people over beers. I think that's where a lot of collaboration and talking and innovation can happen just on the fly. So I think it's going to be a hybrid model, but I think people will be excited to get back to in-person events.
Bill, what about you? As your startup has a remote model to begin with, you've got this telehealth approach. So how important is it to be in person?
Yeah, so the way that I look at it is we've made the best of this, right? So there are people that love it. There are people that have difficulty not having the human interaction. What we've done is that hybrid approach. We ended up getting an office that is open, that we allow people to come in as often as they would like to. Typically 2 days a week is what we see. And what we try to do is optimize for the collaboration time that we need, building software, building processes. As a startup, a lot of your innovation comes when you're collaborating with other people. You're not siloed by yourself, going off and coming up with innovative ideas. So I definitely believe the hybrid model is here to last. I think I personally miss human interaction. I spend most of my days in this room. It's my wife's room, so I don't get to really change it much. So I really look forward to having more human interaction and being able to closer work with our employees. There are efficiencies though. Natasha, I think you nailed it on your head. No commute, more time with your family, the ability to cook more dinners. I think everybody I know has now become a quasi-chef and now knows how to prepare meals better than they did a year ago. So there's benefits from it. I definitely think there's benefits of being in person and having collaboration, and it'll be a happy medium for different companies going forward. We actually talked to a VC in the West Coast though that had a really harsh approach to this. Their strategy is, we will not invest at an early stage company, seed and A, unless they are the majority of the days of the week at work, because they feel like the collaboration needed to go take on larger players is far outweighs the need to be at home. And it's interesting to see their perspective on that.
That is fascinating. It's a bit more black and white than what I've heard, quite frankly.
It's also a sensitive subject. I feel it's, some people have an opinion, but they're worried about that other people who have a different opinion might come at them. And I'm not saying it's a very political red or blue, but there definitely seems to be camps of people where I think the majority of us are now saying it's somewhere in the middle, but you've definitely seen camps on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yep, totally agree. We do have one more question before we're going to have to wrap things up because we're getting toward the end of our time here. This is not targeted toward any specific panelist, so if you want to speak, then please just go ahead. How will the Biden administration affect entrepreneurship? For example, immigration policy, although I imagine this would affect other policy verticals as well.
My personal take on this is it's too early to tell. But I like what we talked about earlier. Let's look at the data that we know today. Let's deal with the reality that we have today. As it evolves and as the administration enacts their policies, we should adapt as an early stage company to leverage them in order to increase the likelihood of success.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Shironda, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, so in our case, it's not so much what they're doing about entrepreneurship, it's more education, obviously. And so as we talk about student loan forgiveness, which is seemingly more and more a possibility with the Biden administration, as we talk about affordable college, you know, those types of issues and policy changes, even around things like how much money are students able to borrow, how much money are parents able to borrow with PLUS loans and those regulations. And so there's a lot that they can do that could have either positive or negative effects on students and their families, and we're kind of just right now just watching and waiting to see.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Natasha, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think I mean, just from a climate change perspective, I think we have an administration that's actually accepting that climate change is real, and that's huge for the electric mobility industry. And I know that the Biden administration has already committed to replace the government fleets of cars and trucks to all electric. So I think it's going to move in a really positive direction in at least the climate change, energy, and mobility space. And I'm just thrilled to be here along for the ride for this new administration. I think most of us are.
100%. And I mean, Bill's right. We're going to have to see how everything unfolds over the next 4 years. Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, sharing your insights on entrepreneurship and Boston's startup ecosystem. It was a thrill to have you all kick off our first event of 2021. Today's discussion was an important one, and we hope that all of our attendees got some insight and positivity for the year. We hope to see you all at another virtual program soon. Remember to go to BostInno.com, sign up for the beat, and see what events we've got coming up. And keep on keeping on. We want to see all of your faces virtually and hopefully one day in person very, very soon.
Thanks, Rowan.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.